Okay, so let's take a look at some text classifiers now. I'll be honest, I didn't find that great of text classifiers within Hugging Face space, but I did find a couple that I think are interesting and worth exploring. So this first one is what's called sentiment structure visualizer. Sentiment analysis is like a really simple thing and tends to be what most of these demos are. We're just like, is this sentence positive or negative? And I don't know. I think that's interesting, but it's probably a little bland. You would obviously use this if you've got like a care chatbot or something that you're running, where you want to see, every sentence that a customer is putting into your chatbot. Is it getting increasingly more frustrated with the bot? Is it finding it happy and able to sort of give positive feedback on that sort of thing? So there's some usages here, not my favorite, not my most exciting, but let's take a look at this because I think there's some other interesting parts of this. So this is sentiment structure visualizer. So first off, we want to put in a sentence, right? So let's just say I like cats. And then tricky thing here is we have to do command enter. So we'll run that. And what we get here is a sentiment label of +1. Now, the other thing is my interactive chart is a little weird looking. It just gives me 0, y, positive, z, something. So I believe this is 0 is the first index. We'll see this when I add more sentences. Y is the label, which is positive, and then z is the score. So let's take a look at what happens when I make this longer. So I like cats. They like to run and play. I wish they smelled better. So let's run this again. Now here's where I think this tool starts to be cool, right? So remember we talked about segment analysis as in addition to overall analysis, and that's what this tool does. Now, I'm not saying it's a good UI. It's definitely a little confusing, but after playing with this, I kind of realized there's some interesting value to this. So this actually breaks down sentence by sentence. So the first sentence is a positive score. So that is index of 0, y is positive, meaning that's a label, and the score is 0.99. Next one is the second sentence, which they like to run and play, is also positive, and the score there is a 0.99. And then our third sentence here is a negative score with a negative 0.99. So what I kind of like about this is you can now put in different sentences. Like let's say, I hate dogs. They smell worse than cats. Fish, I'm neutral on. So we'll run this again. Let's see what we get. So here we go. This is really interesting. Positive, positive, negative, negative, negative. Now, I don't know why fish I'm neutral on is negative. It should probably be somewhere in the middle. Let me think about here, like fish are okay. Yeah. So positive, still giving a really high score. So again, maybe this model is not the best at producing neutrality for us. But what I think is really fascinating here is this is a way to begin to think about how all of our sentences are structured. Now, again, this is based on sentiment, maybe not the best way, but what if we were to do different categories? Like what if we were to say, I don't know, verbose sentences versus simple sentences and categorize based on that? You could then begin to imagine like, hey, you've got a bunch of sentences that are very verbose. Like maybe you want to simplify these. Like again, this is almost like now it's sort of analyzing text and giving feedback on these systems. And if you visualize it in a way where it's like, hey, how do you want to structure your sentences or your paragraphs? Like, do you really want to have a bunch of verbose sentences in the same paragraph? Do you want to sort of break them out? That sort of thing. So again, I see potential here, even if the initial tool is not that great. And if the end result is basically just giving you a positive score, right? So it's saying, hey, there's 3 positives and 2 negatives in here. So again, I think there's some interesting parts of this. I don't like that most of these tools are just purely positive and negative, or maybe even a neutral. But maybe we'll look at actually training our own text model as well. I think the Hugging Face Auto Train allows you to do some more. So let's take a look at some other models that I found that I think have some other interesting details in them. Here I found another space that I think is really interesting. One of the powers of these particular tools is like you don't need to run just one model at a time, right? So here's a really cool space that actually allows me to run multiple models and sort of compare the results. So let's try something here, and let's just say, well, I was happy with the product in the end. I found the customer service to be, let's see, what's a good word here? Let's say disappointing. So this is kind of an interesting challenge, right? Like one of the things we can do to figure out how these models work is just to try to challenge them. So in this case, I've got something here where like I was happy with the product in the end, but I found this disappointing. So let's see what this model gives us as an answer. So interesting, this is giving us essentially like star rankings. Like this is mapping this sentiment to what the stars would provide. So in this case, it looks like it would either be a 2 or 3-star review. So it would not be a 5-star. It would definitely not be a 4-star. And I guess depending on how much you hated the service, you might give it 2. It says, there's a little bit higher score for the 2-star. Let's see what this model does. And the other thing I'll note is that this is giving us our model name here. So I think what we should be able to do is, let me just try this here. Let's go huggingface.co/ let me paste in the name. Yep, and here is the model. So interestingly enough, you can, if you like this model, you can then go download it from Hugging Face as well. Let's come back over here and see what we got. This is still taking a minute to load. Let's see what we get when we run this. Here we go. So interesting. This is a contradiction, a neutral statement, or an entailment. I don't even know what entailment is as a category, but it somehow said it's neutral. Interesting. Here we go with model 3. Negative versus positive. So it says this one is 99% negative. Not sure I would agree with that, but because we've got sort of this contradicting statement, it's sort of figuring out what the difference is here. Let's run model 4. This is others, happy, sad, angry. So this is probably like more sentiment analysis, and it gives us kind of some interesting results here with happy. Again, I wouldn't necessarily say this is happy, but out of these other options, probably true. Label 0 and label 1. I don't even know what that means here. Let's take a look at this model. Doesn't seem to tell us anything about what the results are here. Just going to see what this gives us as an answer. This might help us figure out what it's doing. So label 1, label 0. So I would guess label 1 is positive and label 0 is negative. Let's see if that maps to what we're doing over here. So this would be positive, negative. And that kind of maps to what we have here for positive, negative. So I guess that kind of makes sense that this model is doing positive and negative sentiment. A common thing you might see is that you will get a label of 0 or a label of 1, and you have to map that back to the labels in the model. And sometimes it's not always easy. This is where you might need to lean on your engineers to help you figure out what's going on here. Let's run this last one to see what we get. Again, label 0, label 1, label 2. I don't know what any of these mean. Let's see if we can grab this really quickly and paste this in again. So this must probably is positive, negative, and neutral. So I'm going to guess label 2 is positive, since I like you, I love you. And then between 0 and 1, I'm unsure if this is negative or neutral. So I might go negative, neutral, positive would be my guess. Let's see how that maps to this. So go negative, neutral, positive. So this model is saying it's likely a positive sentence. And this is what's great. Like, I love this little tool. Like, I don't love that I couldn't figure out what these labels are. I had to go dig that up. But I like that I can see, just using this singular sentence, I can see 6 different models and how they interact. And I can see sort of like, this one generates stars. This one generates, I don't really know, maybe some phrasing structure. Sentiment analysis of positive or negative. Sentiment analysis, but a little bit different in happy, angry, sad, other. And then these seem to be positive and negative, and then positive, neutral, and negative. So again, depending on the task, I might choose to use model 6, which is this one, over this one, because I think I'm going to have a lot more neutral. I want to do something with the neutral data. Whereas this one is like, I want to do stuff with only positive and negative, and I don't really want a neutral category because I don't know what to do with that. But I love this just as a space because it, again, allows me to sort of explore and see what's going on. And allows me to compare these kind of apples to apples, even though they're not apples to apples models. So here's another interesting model you might want to look for. Again, there's probably other ones like this on Hugging Face if you dig around enough. Yeah. Okay, so here's one more text classifier that I really wanted to show, in part because it kind of proves me wrong, which happens quite often when I teach stuff. So when I talked about the lecture, I kind of said like, hey, you have to predefine your labels in your classes. I did hint that that's kind of been changing, and here's a model where this changes. So again, previous text classifiers that we've looked at have required you to predefine your categories. But this model is kind of interesting in that it doesn't really force you to predefine stuff. So basically what you're doing here is you're going to set up your categories here, and then you're going to enter the message, and it's going to sort of use those categories on the fly, which is really cool. I think this is a really interesting model, and I would love to play with this more, just sort of see how it works. So let's try this out. So we're going to create some categories. So let's sort of say, let's do poetry, prose, research. I don't know what else would be a good category for text. Speech. And then let's go ahead and, I don't know, let's just grab some poetry. So let's grab a couple sentences from this, and let's drop it in here. And let's see what we get when we classify this. So really interesting here, we get poetry as 38%, speech, prose, and research. So research being the lowest, that probably makes sense, right? Because it doesn't really have a researchy kind of phrase to it. Prose, it would be interesting to sort of think about how these 3 categories might work. Maybe because it is, well, here's an interesting thing. It only has the word speech in it. I wonder if that sort of changes how this operates. The challenge here is like, I don't know what this thing is trained on. I don't know how it's really doing the prediction. So it might be, assigning things somewhat differently. I wonder if we grab, let's just try this. Let's grab these 2 sentences and see if we get a slightly different result. Yeah, so look, now we get a full-on poetry for all of this. I wonder what's in this. So true, converse, a strange. So there's some certain phrases in here that make me think that maybe in the words are sort of tricking the classifier. This is really fascinating because I don't know how accurate this would be. Like, we would really want to train this. Like, you could maybe use this model for anything. It looks like it's got a classifier, a spam detector, a sentiment classifier. This is kind of very flexible, and what I think is really interesting about that is that flexibility. Now, is it more accurate than, say, another model that has been trained on the specific categories? Probably not. But it might be more flexible, and it might be faster for you to use, and it certainly might be faster for you to implement and play with, right? So if you care a little bit less about accuracy, but you just want to get something up and running to maybe run some tests on, maybe run some user research with to make sure it's working the way you expect it to, this might be a cool model to just start with. Again, it might not give you the best example or the best answers, but it at least gives you something interesting here. So let's go ahead. Let me find some research. Let me go to, I don't know, let's go to archive. And let me just grab something from here, astrophysics. So grab this phrase, and we'll pop this in here for the message. And let's classify it. All right, and that threw an error. I don't know why that is. Let's see if we can find out why. So let's try shortening this sentence a little bit. Let's classify on that. Okay, now that ran a second time, so maybe there's a length issue here. Like the longer the message is, the harder it might be to decode. So we did end up with a research as 90% and pros as 10%. So again, pretty interesting. The other cool thing here is if you look down here, categories can be as weird as spam versus ham. I don't even know how you would determine that. Maybe this is maybe this is in a different language and it's not actually ham, and I'm being weird. But I think again, you could play with very weird categories. Like this could almost be an art project, right? Create a bunch of weird categories and then assign text to them almost at random. It would seem like. Obviously, it is multilingual. I won't even try to attempt that since I do not write in those languages or know how to speak them, so I can't really speak to that. But a really fascinating model, and I think there's a lot of potential here to play with. So, again, this is just a thing I found on Hugging Face Spaces, and now I've got maybe a bunch of ideas running on how to use this. So, kind of cool. And again, this is like the power of these tools. So, definitely encourage you to keep playing around and looking through different text classifiers and playing with Hugging Face Spaces.